And we are live. Welcome back from NADA. If you were at NADA, and if you weren't at NADA, it was a hell of a show this year in a different way. I don't think they've been in New Orleans for a while. I haven't been in New Orleans myself since I was in the hot sauce business 30 years ago. So it was a while for me. They had the most snow they've ever had in New Orleans in 150 years. So they had, I think, 9 inches of snow that remained for a few days. So everything closed down. Restaurants closed down, highways, police were everywhere. I was stranded for the longest time I've ever been stranded at an airport in my life, which was almost 3 days. I was thinking of that Tom Hanks movie from the 80s where there's a guy in the airport terminal. And I've actually got a survey out on LinkedIn. I'll put up the results shortly for people who are curious as to how long you've ever been stranded in one place. And I was shocked that there's a number of people that have been stranded for over 4 days in one airport. The longest I've ever been was there. But to give you a sense of Atlanta, if you haven't been, it's the largest airport by volume in the US. They have 45 million visitors a year, average of 4 million a month. And even with that, even though they have 1,000 flights flying out a day, they weren't covering weather because they don't. And you were just hooped. So there were people that were there for like cancel after cancel after
Recording
cancel
in progress.
So it was kind of interesting. But anyway, I'm going to get started with a quick video. If you're not familiar with New Orleans is a music and food city. And of course, they put on a little bit of a party for NADA. Normal attendance for NADA, if you haven't been, is about 60,000 dealers from all over the world, with the exception of Russia these days for obvious reasons. And this year, I think attendance was down a little bit because of frustration weather. But I think they still got about 35 to 40,000 attendees. And they like to throw a party in New Orleans all the time. Next week, Super Bowl. A couple weeks after that's Mardi Gras. So it should be pretty interesting to see how that all turns out. But here we go. Oh, and the Saints aren't in the Super Bowl, I was told. So they were not happy about that, but they're still hosting it. So that's a quick snippet. There was actually on day one, there was another band. Of course, there were beads at scale, being that's a New Orleans thing. And on top of that, there was a lot going on, lots of new technology. I've got about 15 interviews from the show that I'll be sharing once I have a chance to edit them. As you can see, my voice is a little bit off, has been for a while, but obviously a couple of days of interviews didn't help. Also, if you weren't in New Orleans, one of the largest parties every year is the Digital Airstrike Party. They have about 9,300 dealer clients now. And that party I didn't have a chance to go to because I was just exhausted. But they had the Bacon Brothers and Blues Traveler live. So that would have been an interesting show. I had to pass on my tickets because I was too tired. But here we go.
Life is about connection. Having a support system to lean on. And roads to endless possibility. At every turn, guiding the way, we are building the connections that move you.
One of the really nice things about Larry, one of the reasons that we brought him to our dealership, is he's so very much aligned with our core values. So with our brand, which is thoughtful and professional service. And because that alignment really worked out well, because he was so committed to the success of others, we really knew that he was the right person to spend time with our sales team, with our managers and each sales consultant. And we're just really thrilled to have a partnership with him. And so we thank him.
How do you adventure? Is it fast? Is it free? Is it clear? Is it rugged? Is it remote? For your next adventure, trust MotoClose for buying, selling, trading, and protecting all of your motorized assets. Powered by Disclose Dealership Management Dashboard, your all-in-one DMS, CRM, menu, lead gen, inventory, staff, client, and deal management solution. Disclose DMD, like a DMS, only better. Mention promo code AutoHub 2025 to get special pricing, including waive setup costs, no contract, and your first month's free.
Car dealers often underestimate the power of social media. Are you wondering why my face is plastered in your newsfeed? Are you a GM, dealer principal, or a manager at a car dealership wondering why you see me all the time on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, and all over social media? Well, that didn't happen by chance. I target car dealers that are in-market shoppers for social media services, and I'm going to do the exact same thing for you, so that you target in-market shoppers for your brand of customers that purchase your vehicles. During my Viato days, helping car dealers appraise and price cars, everyone was asking me, what do I do on social media? What do I do with Facebook, Instagram, TikTok? And this was back in 2016. So here we are 10 years later. I started a company, became an entrepreneur, and now I help car dealers. They either outsource their social media needs to us, or we have a training and education center where we can teach all of your employees how to do social media in-house. 90% of consumers actually follow a business on Instagram. The average adult sits on TikTok for 2 hours a day in the rabbit hole. To learn more information about it or to get a demo from one of my sales associates, click the link below. We would absolutely love to help you.
And good morning and welcome, Brandy. So here we go. My voice is still not good, just so you know. I did a couple days of interviews. I've got about 14. I also had the opportunity to get Katie Maris's new book. She was at the show. I saw her in 2 states of attire, one at the show and then one as she's rolling into the airport in New Orleans. Completely different, which is kind of funny. So if you don't know Katie Maris, she's all about women's experience in auto. This is her new book. More money, I guess what you would say in New Orleans. In New Orleans, it was kind of interesting just because I interviewed a lot of companies, everywhere from CDK to obviously some of my other sponsors. CDK had a massive presence, as did a lot of companies. The one that was really interesting, if you're not familiar with A to Z Sync, was Amazon. So Amazon is their first time at NADA, and they didn't want to do interviews for any reason about any topic and no photos, please. So that was kind of interesting. But I did talk to Doug Reeves, who I've known for quite a while. And the biggest thing that was going on with him at the show was dealers were like, what does this mean for my business? Is Amazon taking over? What do I need to be afraid of? Which I thought was kind of funny. But the other thing that was interesting was a number of companies, including this one, Automotive Mastermind. Stay tuned for my interview soon. And Velo hosted me at the show, so I appreciate that. They have 5 companies. And they're adding another one as a partnership. So I was joking about the $5 foot long at Subway, and they thought that was kind of interesting. You know, which company did you want to start with, and this kind of stuff. But also in my absence, when I came back late last night and early this morning, even though I'm exhausted, I was catching up on some of the Canadian US news from the Canadian perspective, which was kind of interesting just because obviously Trump has made a lot of changes. But there was also a Trump impersonator walking around the show, which was kind of funny. stand-up comic, and I was tempted to do an interview, but I was running around. But having been at NADA for many years, the thing that was interesting was obviously New Orleans had more snow than they've had in 150 years, which put a little bit of a challenge on travel, but also attendance, much like Dallas. Dallas had about, I think, 40,000 attendees, which is a little lower than Vegas. And I'd say we were about the same this time. But what was interesting there was you had a lot more time to talk to vendors. So a lot more time to talk to dealers, because dealers who made it and ran through the gauntlet, even if they had a private jet, not that everyone has that, still had a problem getting there. And NADA actually comped tickets to the launch event, the pre-show party, because they felt bad about it, which was kind of funny. And there's actually a pretty good letter if you're looking for PR advice on how you deal with that as NADA. How do you write a letter to be nice about the fact that it's a cluster? So it was kind of interesting, and the letter's well written. So as we look at U.S.-Canadian relations, as we look at politics globally, I know there's a big issue with Colombia, which has been kind of interesting how that's been resolved quickly. What's the word on the street in the Canada-U.S. side, in your opinion, as to the automotive industry? To me, that's kind of the elephant in the room, with the exception of, say, companies like BYD, who are also in the play. What's your opinion on what's going to happen there? I know Trump has one opinion, but clearly it's more complicated than that. What's your opinion on what's going to happen there? Brandy obviously was on late, so why don't you start? Not Brandy, sorry. Go ahead.
You want me to start?
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Brandy.
I'll go.
Yeah, youth before age, I guess.
So the one thing I do find as this is kind of surfacing is a real, okay, Canada's got this, we can turn to our own now.
Okay.
And so, yeah, that's what I found. Both sides, I think, but especially Canada saying, not that we have enough to support ourselves, I'm not saying that, but at least, hey, now looking at the bright side, what does this do? This makes us look internally, and how can we support those that are going through the strain of what this is going to reflect? How that will trickle into automotive, though, the audience is local, so you're really asking the people locally to support locally, but are we saving that much? There's just too much of a trickle that I think reflects and can actually have the impact, or not have an impact locally. Do you know what I'm saying? I feel like it's, as much as, yes, we will turn to support locally, will that be enough? Will that actually offset? I don't think that those are going to be numbers that we look at from a global or from a trade picture. Do you know what I'm saying? How much more is there going to be an increase locally? And if not, what is the decrease actually going to be in the bigger picture?
Yeah, it's interesting. So when you look at automotive manufacturing and automotive retail, and you even look at distribution, I think, globally today, and you look at integration with Canada, the US, and Mexico being the three markets that are conjoined at the hip, essentially, I don't think you can really risk messing with that. But at the same time, it's kind of a wild card. So I don't know. I don't know enough about the nuts and bolts, but luckily for us, we do have a guest on today who does know way more than I do. What's your thought?
Well, I think if you look at what Trump has said, one of the things we learned from his last presidency is that you need to listen to what he says, because he generally says does what he says and when to perform. So I think the reality is he's threatened tariffs against Canada and Mexico.
Yeah.
I guess the rationale for the threats is maybe who knows? It's set up as being Canada and Mexico are both allowing fentanyl and illegal migrants to come into the country. But I think, in Canada's case, at least, that's we're a very, very, very small portion of both fentanyl and migrants coming into the United States. So, I mean, I think if you look at the tariff that you probably were looking at, it's being put out there for other reasons. And those other reasons, I think, are, President has also said that he's interested in not only reviewing the Canada-USMCA agreement, but actually renegotiating parts of that agreement, which is a little bit odd, given that at the time he negotiated that agreement in the first place to replace NAFTA. He called it the most perfect agreement ever negotiated. So apparently it's maybe not so perfect because we're going to be reviewing it again. But I think the reality is that the U.S. Put in the review clause in the agreement in the first place was to provide a bit of a stopgap, if you will, to allow them to revisit things and try and extract more concessions potentially from Canada and Mexico that they didn't receive the first go around. So I think that's where a lot of this is coming from. I guess the question is, when are we going to see the tariffs, and how much are those tariffs going to be, or will we be able to dodge the bullet altogether? My own personal view is that we're probably not going to be able to dodge the bullet altogether, but the timing and the quantum are probably the things that are more, who knows what that's going to be. The executive orders that the president signed, I think there are 100 or more of them last week ago today. One of them was trade related, and in that executive order, he committed to basically studying the trade imbalances, trade deficits, a lot of other trade measures, including revisiting the USMCA, and have his departments and agencies report back on April 1st. So presumably there will be some period of study of the reports after that, and then the other shoe would fall. However, during I think everybody saw some of the media coverage when he was signing those executive orders that evening. Somebody asked him a question, a reporter asked him a question about tariffs on Canada and Mexico, and he suggested at that point, and I think it's been repeated elsewhere again, that he was looking at February 1st. So who knows? I would be. It's doubtful to me that they would be able to execute February 1st, but I think the whole part of the other reality with all of this is the whole activity by the president is to keep everybody else in the world a little bit off balance, wondering what's going on and what he's going to do next. So I guess we've seen a bit of this movie before, so we do have to take him seriously, but how this all plays out is still a little bit uncertain.
Yeah, I noticed yesterday I was in the U.S. that North Korea's fired missiles again to see what he'd do. So that was kind of interesting, just because of the little rocket man comment last time. But yeah, I think you're going to see some testing. The other thing that was fascinating, being that I've been hearing about AI technology at NADA for years, and this year was really interesting just because everyone has an AI component to their software. But a lot of them are trying to pivot away from that naming nomenclature because they're afraid that the dealer and their potential customers and even the industry is afraid of it. So it was really interesting to see them sort of say, okay, we have AI, but it's different than these guys, or we have AI, but it's different than this, and we have AI. And to your point about Trump, it's a firing a volley and saying, okay, what are they going to do? So maybe I can look good, but maybe I don't have to do anything. And I think you're seeing that with Colombia. Supposedly, he tried to drop off some deportees at their airport, and they said, no, you can't land him here. And then they landed him in other ways. So I think you're going to see some change. But I think also you got to caveat that with, can you really change things when they're so lockstep? Like, I think that would be a catastrophic fail if he actually delivered on that in automotive, but more importantly, it wouldn't be acceptable to influencers around the guy. So I think a lot of that is pomp and ceremony to see if he can get wins, but it'll be definitely interesting to see. But when you look at specifically manufacturing, and you look at manufacturing where parts move across the border a lot, and even parts being imported from countries, for example, China, or as Trump says it, China, I think that's how he pronounces it. I don't think that can really be stopped based on the length of the supply chain, especially when cars have gotten more expensive today than they were 5 years ago, and payments being a big issue. I mean, I was talking to a company, I think they're called Lot or something Bot. Anyway, I don't have the name off the top of my head, but what they did is they started in banking, and they put together systems so security was part of banking. And then they got into auto, and the auto guys were like, "Yeah, we're just rocking the photocopier." And they're like, "Yeah, that's really not what you want to be doing." So the other fear was, oh, how complicated is this going to be for my guys and gals to do it right? And fast forward 5 years, they have a system that was developed, I think, for healthcare and banking that's now in auto. So it's not just technology from an AI perspective; it's technology from a user experience perspective. Cite Amazon as one of the examples, or eBay Motors, or Carvana. But also, if the cost of the car goes up, not only might it be an issue in actually selling those cars, but also affordability for the average consumer. And being that the average consumer is probably who got Trump elected, that could be dicey. So we'll see what happens there. But I think the bigger question is, what can Canada do from the oil and gas perspective, from the manufacturing perspective, from distribution, whether it be CNCP or whatever, to really say, hey, yeah, we can stop this right now, but then you can have a different problem. That's, I think, my biggest, as I look around both in Canada and when I was in the US talking to people, it was like, well, what do you think would happen if this change was made? And then I basically would shut up and listen to the Americans or Canadians talk about it, or Europeans who were there as well. What do you think, Brandy? What do you think they had to say?
Well, just even a couple things came to mind when you were saying that, because I would be curious to look at how the alignment of, say, one example of offsetting that would be an extended amortization on these loans.
Right.
Now in auto, we've gone from when I first started, you were pitching 4 and 5 years. This is 27 years ago, but you were pitching 4 and 5 years. Now we're pitching 7, 8, and some lenders going 10, and in RV space and power sport, we're going 20.
Wow.
And so, that's been the one talk when I think about how that has aligned and how the lenders have continuously extended their amortizations to help with the affordability. Maybe in the past, it'd be interesting to look at that being one of the things what triggered those events in the past. What made us go from 5 to 6 years, 6 to 7? Was there a monumental, a monumental situation happening at that time that made lenders go to that stage? That would be, I think, just one of the things that you'll see this side, Canada, or its lenders in general, or our industry, have to challenge that.
But what about, like, you look at Japan as a market, they have 100-year mortgages. If you've got a 10-year car loan, let's just say it's 10 years. Let's just say that's the math. How are you getting that person out of the car in 5?
Well, but here's the
thing. How is that going to happen?
100-year mortgages.
Yeah.
But do they have 10-year auto loans? The mortgage is something different.
Yeah.
That's that is a house that has a different type of value just based on their population versus their demand or their supply, right? So I think that would be different. Do they view auto the same, and is it there, because that's a heavily depreciating asset?
Well,
so I think that would play into it as well.
I think they're going to get real creative on leasing. I mean, I go back 25 years, BMW was heavily subsidizing leasing. And then Tesla came into the market and basically stole a lot of their 3 Series customers, even though BMW doesn't want to admit that. That was the same customer. But now it's like, okay, I got millennials and Gen Z who are living in their parents' basement in some cases, not to beat them up, but that's the reality, including my brother's kids. They can't afford a $1,000 car payment. They just can't. So I think the manufacturers are going to have to pivot on ownership terms, maybe much like the cell phone companies. I got a new Android phone the other day for demo purposes. And they're like, oh, you can get this phone and pay for it for 2 years, and then just return it and get another phone. I'm like, so I'm leasing a cell phone now. They said, no, it's a new way to own it. I'm like, no, I'm clearly leasing a cell phone. So I'm looking at it going, okay, I've got Amazon and CarSaver and others changing the way customers buy cars, but maybe that fractional ownership or that leasing may change to make that affordable. Because if you look at, say, a Honda Civic, to pick a very popular car in Canada that's also built here for the most part, I mean, that car used to be, when I bought my first Honda Civic in '93, it was 13,000 US. When I sold them, they were about 20,000 ish Canadian, I think. Today they're closing on $30,000. That just makes the affordability an issue. Even if I stretch it 10 years, which I could do, and I had a lot of conversations at NAD about customer retention on the service drive, which is now a shifting focus, because if I'm selling cars every 7 years, for example, in the US market, I need to retain that customer because I can't get them out of that car. But if I stretch that loan to 10 years, I mean, can I get that customer out of the car in 8? I don't know, right? I mean, that's my question, is from a manufacturing standpoint, that they have to build cars to make a go of it. What does that do to the manufacturing side, even if there isn't tariffs? Like, does that mean I make less cars? Does that mean I make very specific models? I mean, what does that make? I mean, I think the customer need, the cost of vehicles, and the amount of vehicles you can make is another whole thing. But I mean, I don't know. I don't know enough about that manufacturing side, even though I studied in my MBA, GM versus Toyota, by the way. But, I mean, I would say that if the goal is to make more cars, not less, you got to keep that term of loan in a reasonable range. And I think extending it, I don't know. I think you got to change the way people buy cars in terms of finance. That's what I think. Any thoughts?
Ian, were there not a couple of companies in Vancouver that I recall that would allow you to lease a high-end unit?
Yep.
Be it for $2,000 a month, you could switch it out.
Yep.
At 1, 2, or 3
Yep.
months and constant. You know what I mean? So now when you look at that sales platform, is really what you're describing.
Yep.
But what they did to accomplish it was made it so that you could. Now that's an asset that's a completely different. Commands a completely different audience, right? So that'd be very different as well.
Well, it's interesting to bring that up. So Porsche US had the same kind of model. So they were like, yeah, I got a Porsche customer. In the summer they want a 911, in the winter they want an SUV, whatever it is, they can switch it up. And I think it was Open Road Group tried to do this around their wide array of vehicles. The problem was, let's just say that monthly payment is $2,500. I don't know what it was, but it was something like that. What about that person who, say, wants to have a $600 car payment and maybe doesn't want to switch it? They just want it to work for their lifestyle. Like, they're used to making their $1,500 payment for a cell phone or whatever that is. But I don't think car payments over the last 10 years, like the actual expectation of customers has caught up to that, say, $1,000 car payment, right? They're still thinking it should be $500, right? I mean, that's kind of their thought process. Now, leasing can...
That's bi-weekly nowadays.
Yeah, but leasing can help with some of that. But if I have a group of manufacturers who are saying, listen, I got to make 1 million cars or whatever that number is, how do you think the manufacturers can adapt to that? I mean, I've always thought it's about knowing more about what the customer will buy, so the dealers have less inventory. They have more vehicles that move quicker. But I don't know from the manufacturing standpoint. Any thoughts?
Well, look, I mean, I think the challenge, as you rightly point out, is for manufacturers, and we're seeing this kind of, I think, in with respect to electric vehicles as well right now. Like,
Yep.
Everybody says, well, cost needs to come down. Yes, the cost does need to come down, and everybody always points to the battery, which is, it's a huge component of the cost of the vehicle.
Yep.
But the other factor that people don't consider is scale. And if you're building a factory to produce 150,000 EVs and you're only pumping out 30,000, then amortizing those costs over 30,000 units, isn't going to help. So, that's a real problem with cost as well, and affordability. And, to your other point is that if you look at consumers, they're saying, well, I've got, again, with respect to electric vehicles, I've got, $500, $600 a month set aside for my transportation, my car payment. And yes, consumers will save money over the long haul owning their EV, but if it costs them another $200 or $300 a month, then that's a different story. And I think that's why we're seeing some of the lumpiness in the in the take up of the EV market right now, and the fact that we've had federal government, eliminate their incentives on vehicles, the EVs, and Quebec government eliminate incentives on EVs. If you think about being a consumer in Quebec and you wanted to get into an EV, all of a sudden your incentive from December to will be February has gone from $12,000 down to nothing. There's a promise in Quebec that it's going to come back in April, but who knows?
Yeah.
But I mean, I think the other issue with respect to affordability, which is, again, to a certain extent, it's what kind of society do we want to live in? And it's great, I guess, that, the US has a focus on bringing manufacturing back to the United States, and Canada to a certain extent as well, doing the same type of thing. But, the reality is that when we bring stuff back to North America, it doesn't get less expensive. And there's a reason that the global supply chain became the global supply chain, because you were trying to get the best product at the lowest possible cost, and then integrating that into a vehicle in North America, and providing consumers with the best product at the lowest cost. So when we're kind of repatriating all this manufacturing both to North America, Canada, US, things that's not going to help affordability. It's actually going to hurt affordability. And unless, we as a society want to say, well, okay, it's important to have manufacturing jobs in Canada and the United States. If we want those jobs, then we have to be prepared to pay more for our vehicles or our t-shirts or our fridges or computers, whatever else we have to be purchasing. So, it maybe sounds a little bit esoteric, but I think that's what you really need to think about is what kind of society do you want to live in? Have good paying jobs, but have more expensive products. Reality is, I think we've just become too used to, I don't care where it's made as long as it's the cheapest thing out there you get. That's the challenge, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I just came from a show which probably had more promotional products in one place than you've probably ever seen if you haven't been. And it was funny because I had these shirts made for the show, and they were made in Texas, actually. And I think they actually make them there. They're a little bit more than a t-shirt made in China or Vietnam or whatever. But the amount of stuff that's generated with a logo on it, be it Carfox, or actually had a pretty funny pen with a little fox on the top of it, which I liked. But the amount of stuff that's generated, would that company pay 30% more to have it being made in the US, or 50% more to have it made in Germany, or whatever that might be? And I think part of that issue is also, and this is something that a cardio friend of mine said to me, he says, the customer wants all this technology. They want all this state-of-the-art stuff in a car, but they don't want to pay what it costs. So if you put the price of that stuff up, then the only thing you can adjust, I think, is margin for the car dealer, which I know Honda did last year in the Canadian market and to a lesser degree in the US, but also, how customers own vehicles. So the reason I always use BMW is they subsidize it, as has Tesla, but that just is putting off that problem, which is that car going to be worth what they think it was worth at the beginning? And if someone, say, has an EV, and that's a great example, EVs historically cost about double what a petrol car or gas car, ICE car cost. Is 10-year ownership realistic for that customer who buys an EV? I don't know, but that's another option, is as you look at extension of that ownership term, let's say it becomes 10 years for a new customer, what's the revenue model for the dealer or the manufacturer in terms of service on those vehicles? And that was something that came up. There's an interesting product called Text to Drive from Velo. So it was an automated product basically to say, okay, we sold you a car, great. What are we doing now? We want you to come back and service it. Well, the numbers aren't good in terms of retention. So how do we improve that in an automated fashion? And that was interesting because when I did work with General Motors, actually in the Canadian market, I believe at the time, and this was almost 15 years ago, their retention target was 40%. So I remember talking to members of the General Motors Canada team, which I did talk to in the US at the show. I was like, so 60% is still the accepted loss of customers? And they said, what do you mean? I'm like, well, you should be retaining as many as possible. And actually on our new shirt, there's a quote from Sam Walton about experience which is about, I don't know if you can see it, but it's about, experience is the key piece. Like if you can't have the best customer experience, then whether or not someone's brand loyal, you're going to lose them. So I think the new model is going to be make the cars people want with the features they want at a price they can afford, and maybe don't make as many models. And I think with data analytics, both from an OEM point of view and a dealer point of view, and a lot of data happening, maybe it'll take some time, but I think factories will just have to be very dialed in to what they're building. Where they're building it, I think that's just a strict case of where are the manufacturing plants now and what makes sense. I don't think tariffs are going to help. Like, I think tariffs are just a mistake because you're just increasing the cost across the board, which doesn't help anybody really, in my opinion. But at the end of the day, I still think it's a volley. Like you're firing a shell across the bow and saying, what are you going to do? How are you going to pivot? In my opinion. But what's your thought, Brandy?
A couple of things actually come to mind as you guys were talking. First off, I do believe that the manufacturer is looking, so we ask how are they going to get to the numbers? How are they going to get to the volume that they want? They're going to look at other avenues other than the traditional dealer. And so this is why we see companies going onto Amazon, trying to look at other points of sale, be it direct, etc., be it they refer to the customer back to the dealer, whatever that looks like, they're still looking at other avenues so that, so that they can. And I will say, I kind of feel like, sadly, the customer experience is what's driven this to happen. Us not caring at the dealer level enough about the customer is actually what's created this ripple effect. Now, the other thing, I just saw a video, I think it was by Nixon, where he basically said, the only way a government can create more money is to raise rates and taxes, or, did you see that one? Or print money.
Yeah, pretty much.
He said, because otherwise, if you're selling less than you're consuming, you will always be raising rates and taxes or printing more money. And so after seeing that, I find this very interesting, this tariff imposition, because that isn't going to help. That really is raising rates and taxes. It's not allowing even your own country to sell more globally. And I think that would be, that will be a hindrance in the long run.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because not only are governments in Canada calling for lowering interest rates again, in the US, Trump was basically saying, almost dictating to the US Fed, saying you must lower interest rates. But technically, the Federal Reserve Bank in the US or the Bank of Canada, there's supposed to be an iron curtain between the two. You should never be dictating to the bank what you need to do. But more importantly, if you have an increase in costs, and obviously increase in currency as part of that, but is a lowering in interest rates the answer? I don't know. I think that's really interesting. When I was doing my MBA, The Economist magazine, and this was under Trump's last last presidency, not pregnancy. There was a picture of a hot rod on the cover of Economist. You can look it up, and it was like a hot rod with flames coming out of the side. And my economics prof was like, "You really shouldn't have your foot to the floor in every area. That's probably not a good recipe for success." So I'm really curious as to what happens with a combination of tax cuts and interest rates combined with things like tariffs. Because traditionally tariffs, just like additional costs and anything, just get passed on to the consumer anyway. So when you do that, yeah, you generate money, fine. But who pays for that additional cost? It's the consumer buying those products and goods. So it's not really a solution. You're just kind of deflecting. You're not really helping anyone. You're just making things more expensive. Now you can argue the point, but from a high school level economics
thing, that will eventually lead to having to print more money, unless you're.
Well, yeah, but I think there's bigger. There's bigger things at play with currency. Global currency over the last 10 years, especially over the last 5, has made some change just because of the greenback plus the Asian market. But also there's interesting stuff in automotive globally because of the China market. You're seeing even brands that are heavy hitters like Porsche going, our sales have dropped 25%. Why? Because the Chinese are buying something else. And if you're at 40% of the market sale volume being China, You can't afford to lose that market. So what do you have to do? You have to reduce your profitability in market, but can you hold on to it? And I think that's also true in the US. So if you make cars made in Mexico or Canada more expensive, which you could do, what does that mean for the US market? It means domestic product or imported product that's made in those markets, or part of it made in that market, is going to get more expensive in the US. So that's kind of interesting. Do you think that's going to impact prices in the Canadian market? Do you think the Canadian car prices will change? I mean, what's your thought? Like, I don't know. I'm just curious. Go ahead.
Well, it's hard to speak to prices in the Canadian market, but you're absolutely right in terms of the US market. Yeah, everything that is shipped there, I think, some economists have suggested that, across the board, not just automotive, but across the board, everything's going to become like $3,000 more expensive to Americans.
Yeah.
So while they think they're punishing Canadians, they're also punishing Americans as well. And there is no, no winner in a tariff war for sure.
Yeah.
And, I think the reality is in automotive, the challenge is that 85% of what we build here goes to the U.S. market, and there's not an immediate alternative for those vehicles to go somewhere else. So the reality is, too, to your earlier point, is that we don't build things for the U.S. market, autos for the U.S. market. We build things with the Americans in terms of components coming into Canada, being put into a sub-assembly, being shipped back into the U.S. for integration into a vehicle, and vice versa for vehicles that are built in Canada. But the other reality is, when you look at it, and forget whether it was Automotive News or some other publication pointed out last week, I believe it was, that if you look at the top best-selling vehicles in their categories, a lot of them are actually made in Canada. So they're essentially punishing their own consumers that are looking to purchase these vehicles. And whatever, I think if you'll try and look in what's behind the president's thinking on this, is that he would probably rather that Canada didn't have an auto industry, and that all of those manufacturing facilities were in the U.S. employing Americans, and that Canadians would just buy vehicles that were built in the U.S. So apparently that works for Americans, but Canada shouldn't be able to enjoy the same opportunity of having their own manufacturing sector. But there we go.
Yeah, well, I heard something about avocado prices from Mexico like quadrupling. So basically, if you're an avocado toast person, you're going to have a different problem. And I heard something from Doug Ford saying, we're not going to import any U.S. bourbon, which I thought was really kind of funny. I was like, so you're going to stop alcohol imports from the United States market? I thought that was really interesting. But yeah, I think you're right 100%. If I'm looking at Honda Civic or Honda CR-V or Toyota products, or pick your product, you don't want more expensive cars. You want more affordable cars. So the way to do that is to say, hey, we need to build cars probably with less content in them, cars that have less features that the younger generation or even people that are just working class can afford, so that we can keep rolling forward. It's not like Canada is going to increase our car sales by 30% to make up the difference, I don't think. But I always use the example of Lululemon, because I used to live in Vancouver. And the founder, one of his big mantras when he founded the company, even though he's a dual citizen, is he sells Lululemon products cheaper in Canada than the US because it's a Canadian company, which was kind of funny because technically the reverse should be true. So it was kind of interesting that his philosophy was that way. And having been in the US for the last week or so, the thing that was really interesting was when you look at, let's just say Subway, for example, or pick your restaurant, everywhere in January and February, there's always an incentive because Christmas hangover happens. And they always do the same advertising. It's like $5-6, or in Canada, maybe it's $7. I don't know. But if you see a currency fluctuation in the US market, so the greenback weakens, it's going to be interesting to see how other governments react. And I think that's also true with the auto, because currency is always part of that. Hard cost for goods, where they're made,
Stopped.
all those kind of things. I don't know why it did that, but that's okay. So what's your opinion on how Mexico as a country, can deal with that, being that they, like Canada, make some of the goods. And I'm assuming some of those are manufactured in Tennessee and other places. So they do the same kind of thing. How do you think that's going to impact Canada different than Mexico? Like, what do you think?
Well, I think Canada's probably gone at some length to differentiate itself from Mexico, to get more on the good side of the president, and maybe rightfully so, because if you look at, and the key behind all of this is that the real issue is not Canada or Mexico. The issue is China, and that's been the issue with Mexico, and why the president has looked somewhat askance at Mexico in terms of allowing Mexican goods to be perhaps misrepresented as Chinese goods rather be misrepresented as Mexican goods, and so on and so forth. But I think the reality, if you look at the global automotive industry, it's regionalized, and every region has to have some low cost or lower cost component to it. And for the North American industry, that's Mexico, and it got majority of the manufacturing happening in the U.S. We've got Mexico for a lot of the lower cost attributes, things that require a lot of manual labor, for instance, done in Mexico. And we have Canada as well. The same thing is true in Europe, where the European automotive industry relies a lot on Eastern Europe for a lower cost area, and then you've got the Asian market, where it used to be China, but even some of the costs in China are now more expensive than other Southeast Asian jurisdictions. So, I mean, it is a little bit ironic that in North America we have this sort of bun fight going on between the United States and Canada and Mexico, when really the thing that we should be doing is trying to focus our attention on larger geopolitical risk, which is China.
100%. 100%. I mean, you look at companies like VinFast in Vietnam. When I was going to school, I remember one of our manager of finance, he goes, okay, where are your clothing made? Like, pull out the label, where is it made? And one of the ladies I went to school with said, oh, mine's made in Italy. He says, they haven't made low-cost stuff in Italy forever. China's too expensive. They're making it in Pakistan or Bangladesh or somewhere else. And that, to your point, as China has risen, they're doing the same thing. And Mexico and Canada and the US need to be looking at, okay, what makes sense to make here or assemble here? What doesn't? Because you've got to be competitive globally. And I think that's true no matter what you make. But also, when you look at the rise of, different car companies or different vehicle companies, there was actually a vehicle I saw at the airport. It was a police electric scooter with lights like a police car in the airport that they were driving around. It was kind of funny, but I guarantee you that's not made in the United States, like guaranteed. So when you look at the goal, which is to make the car affordable and to maintain profitability and scale, what's your thought on, how the market moves forward as younger people are saying, hey, maybe I don't need everything in a bag of chips in my car. Like, maybe I need a more basic car. I always think of the Micra from Nissan back in the day, which was like a $10,000 new car, which was cheaper than used cars at the time. I was like, how do you make a car for 10 grand? Like, how does that happen? Right. Yeah. Those cars kind of have disappeared. Like, you don't see a lot of entry level cars anymore. Like Honda Civic hatchback when I was a kid, and, CRX and that kind of stuff. You don't see those like little cars very often. They're just not on the map. Like, what do you think there?
Well, and I think you hit the nail on the head earlier on as well, in terms of the technology that's being built into the car. And I think the reality is that, despite the fact that vehicles seem really expensive these days, and they are, if you look back at traditional inflation compared with inflation on vehicles and the amount of technology that's been built into a vehicle, there really hasn't been that much overall inflation and the cost of the vehicle, given content in vehicles. But maybe we'll get to that. But I think the reality is I don't think automakers are putting technology into vehicles that either people don't want or that the government isn't requiring them to put in. And that's the other side of the coin that people don't often think about, is that, well, you may not think that you want this particular technology in your vehicle. Well, it's actually something that the government has mandated the manufacturers to put into the vehicle. So those costs need to be reflected as well. But in terms of squaring the affordability circle, the other reality is I think most automakers now are looking at, okay, well, what am I? Am I an automaker, or am I a mobility provider?
Yeah.
Am I a mobility solutions provider? And if people start looking at automakers through that sort of lens, then maybe they say, okay, well, maybe I'm not going to have that customer returning to me every 4 or 5 years. Maybe it is a 10-year cycle. So where do I get my revenue? Well, maybe they start getting my revenue from the content that's distributed through the vehicle, regardless of what that may be, whether it's entertainment, infotainment, all sorts of other things. So I think all these things are being looked at. Transportation as a service as well, maybe moving from a vehicle ownership model to a vehicle use model, like we're seeing a little bit now. But I mean, all those things I think are probably on the drawing boards of most automakers, just in terms of how they see a future moving forward for them as well to stay viable entities.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the airline industry, not to say that their customer experience is perfect, but I mean, you go on a plane today and you go, okay, I got internet if you want it, I got luggage if you want it. I mean, WestJet, I was on a flight for WestJet coming back, and they're like, oh yeah, we got this low cost fare, but yeah, you can't bring any luggage on. So just so you know, you're paying for those bags. So come on now. So it was kind of funny because I think the new CEO of WestJet I think he worked for Lufthansa, and they had him on one of the news channels, and they're like, well, isn't this ridiculous? He goes, well, no, we're giving people options. You want a low fare, that's fine. It includes these things. You want a higher fare, it includes these things. If you want to add, it's possible. And I think that is also true as we look at things like car theft. Like my brother-in-law lives in Toronto, and he's had a piece of technology in his car with his phone where he could track it. Someone stole the car. But the thing that was interesting was one of the solutions is an old piece of tech, which is a kill switch, which is something from the 70s, I think, that people used to put on muscle cars. But, it was funny because there's been a lot of blame to the automotive manufacturers, but really they're mandated by the government. This is what you have to have. But the market has changed. But that's not to say you couldn't say, hey, if you want better protection, you could add this feature. Right. So there could be features that could be added, but also just like on an airline or at your McDonald's, you don't have to get the Happy Meal. You can just get the hamburger. Like, this is what it costs. And that may be the new way to do it, is say, okay, your car payment for these features that you want is this. You can get these other features for less, but if you want, you can add these features in the future and we can just change your payment. To your point with entertainment, if you want to play PlayStation in the passenger seat, you need a screen for that. It costs this. Like, a screen comes with the car, but if you don't want it enabled, we can just take that off there and then you can add it whenever you want. I know BMW got in a little hot water with charging for heated seats on a monthly payment, which I thought was kind of interesting. But Tesla's done that for many years. They've had the technology in a lot of cars, but a lot of them just didn't come with it. So you could put it on your credit card whenever you want. You want self-driving, no problem. So I think that option might be a good way for manufacturers to have that economy of scale to build cars at a good cost, but maybe change their revenue model based on the need to make that payment work. And I think that's a very interesting solution, as the younger people who look at these like it's attached to their head or their hand. Everything kind of has become a cell phone. Their computer is that way. Their TikTok. I saw some people on a plane. They got the internet on the plane flight to watch TikTok videos. Like, they paid for the internet on their cell phone so that for 3 hours they could look at TikTok. And I was like, that's crazy. But fill your boots. You want to pay for access. It costs this much money, right? So I thought that was really interesting that they weren't using it for work. They were using it for entertainment. And not because they couldn't have it on the TV on the plane, but because it wasn't possible. So one of the hotels I stayed at was really interesting. Some of them have some TV channels, some of them have more. And one of them had, what streaming service do you use? We have that in our hotel room now because people don't want to watch television. Like, they don't want to watch any of it. They don't even care. Like, does it work with my phone? Right? So it's kind of interesting. What do you think, Brandy?
Absolutely. And I find this interesting, especially because when I started in finance, this is 27 years ago, I had people comparing, what's my payment if I get the car, the automatic or the standard?
Yeah.
What's my payment if I get air conditioning or not?
Yeah.
That's actually where I started. And now if the car doesn't park itself, it's just like not enough. And so that is very interesting. I think that's actually the way it should be approached, just because, I learned in sales, you don't start, if somebody tells you their budget, you don't start them at the most expensive car, right? You
No.
start them with a cheap car, so there's the option for the upsell. And so, yeah, that would be an interesting take there. Something that was mentioned in the beginning, and I'm so sorry, sir, I didn't catch your name because I got on late.
David.
That's David. This is
What was
Brandy.
that?
David.
Okay, so sorry. Yeah, exactly what you said in the beginning, obviously, with the, the international trade. What causes us to look elsewhere? If it's not broken, we're not looking. And so we haven't been looking for so long. And now that things are starting to surface, whether we call them breaking just to be broken and remade again, now we're looking at, hey, where else can we be outsourcing? That scares me for a few different reasons, because things have worked. And so now who are we making more rich by outsourcing other items? That's one concern.
Yep.
I saw an article in Automotive News where it was in November. Actually, I just opened my late magazine up from November, and it said to start. It was an article in the middle that said, let's start looking at Portugal as the place to possibly expand into European markets. And so I found that interesting, because now all we're looking at doing is saying, okay, maybe this has been great, but if it's not going to work anymore, what can we make work for us, right? So yeah, outsourcing, that will be the big thing. It's just a matter of who are we, as well as who is the United States giving the things that we used to give to them. Where are they getting it now? Fuel, etc. Where, that exchange. So that's the ripple effect, I think, to be most concerned about, especially.
Yeah, I mean, I was at the airport and I saw more and more of these automated checkouts. So I was in New Orleans and there was a coffee shop and they have these automated checkouts like McDonald's. You can buy or whatever, right? So I'm there and there's an older couple, probably in their 70s, trying to figure out how to buy 2 bottles of soda. So you scan the soda and then you can add things like Amazon. And then they're like, yeah, well, how do we pay? So I'm trying to help them because there's nobody physically at the store, really. And they're like, well, how do we pay? I said, well, with a credit card. Well, can we pay with cash? And I'm like, no. And then the lady who works at the store who was trying to fulfill the orders comes over and goes, oh, no, it has to be a credit card. And I'm like, well, what if they don't want to do that? So it was kind of like we're moving forward 6 steps forward, 3 steps back, because I was at another store and there were so many automations in checkout that I was like, well, what happens if someone just walks by and steals stuff? Because there's merchandise everywhere, but there's no one policing the merchandise because the machines do it all. So it was kind of like, okay, that's interesting. So I agree with you. If you're looking at it going, Canada can export things to different markets, whether it be food or other. Same is true with Mexico and other countries. The American market is a huge market, but at the same time, I think we have to do a better job as a country of saying, hey, we need more customers. Maybe they're not Americans. Nothing against Americans. Like, hey, we're happy to sell it to them. But at the same time, we got to say, okay, what do we build well in Canada? What can we build better than other people? And what can we export? But more importantly, does it make sense for us? And EVs has been an interesting one for the last 18 to 24 months because the Canadian government has invested a lot in EV tech. But the take rate for EVs has kind of been all over the place because of incentives from the government, but also affordability. I mean, when you look at, I think it was Budget or Enterprise bought a bunch of Teslas and then realized the customers didn't like them. Then they were trying to wholesale them out so they could get rid of them. And now they're saying, hey, you rented an electric car. Did you want to buy it? Because, we don't want it. Like, we're not interested. So it's kind of interesting.
You bring up something interesting, though, because BC just announced, obviously, with their decrease in the rebates.
Yeah.
Tesla, the lower model, I don't know which one it is, if it's Model 3 or what.
Model 3 is their entry level.
Yeah, Tesla 3. Now they're expecting sales to plummet for the simple fact that they're now priced outside of the allowable rebate that comes to it. So then you also look at how much did those rebates actually play such a huge effect on his market and the market he gained just for simply having.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. So I went years ago when I lived in Vancouver to a Tesla store, and at the time they were starting leasing Model 3s. So I went into the store. I said, okay, if I want to lease a Model 3, what's the residual value? What's the lease term? What's the amount I'm borrowing? What's the carrying cost? And he goes, oh, no, there is no lease end. I said, oh, why is that? He says, oh, it's forced return. I said, okay, so still carrying costs. That's how math works. Didn't understand the question. And much like BMW, they're subsidizing. But the bigger challenge is depreciation of that asset. So Tesla, I don't know other electric cars, but Tesla has a depreciation number of somewhere around 70%, higher if it's a Cybertruck, because those things have had all kinds of issues in terms of resale, but also in terms of rate of sale. They just donated a bunch to fight the California wildfires, I believe. But when you look at it and say, okay, I've got a model kind of like BMW, and my cars are expensive and the rebates have some impact, really it's about payment, right? Like how is that affordable? Like a buddy of mine lives in San Francisco. They have a crazy low lease payment because otherwise people aren't buying the car. Like they like Tesla. It's all good. What's the payment, dude? Because my real estate price is high. My taxes are high. My property tax is high. My food prices are high. So I can't afford a $1,200 payment on a Tesla or anything else.
Well,
So
also
that's what
leasing
they're
a Tesla, even outside of Tesla's leasing, if you get even the government rate or rebate, that rebate comes off the amount you're actually taking, not the residual, right? It's acting
Yeah.
like money down. And so that is how they achieved, even outside of Tesla's leasing, very low lease rates just to move inventory was rebates like that.
Yeah, but the key piece that people are missing is the used market. So if I have, let's say, 10,000 Teslas I lease this year in pick your province or state, the opportunity for Tesla and anybody else making an electric car, Hyundai or Volkswagen, I know there's been a lot of investment in Canada in building battery plants. The real thing, if I'm going to own a car for 10 years and I'm going to want to return it after 5 because I'm tired of it because my attention span hasn't extended, that used car, if the manufacturer has a program on it, much like a certified used program, there's a huge opportunity to make those cars affordable for the younger generation who maybe can't afford a new car and put a warranty on it. And then there's a double win there for those cars. But more importantly, I don't think the younger generation really cares about resale value. It's more about what do I want to drive? Like my generation probably cares more about it, but they're just like, hey, they're like a cell phone. I want a new one every 3 years or whatever that time frame is. Cars are the same. I don't think people's attention span for cars is going to get longer. I think manufacturers and dealers just got to get smarter about how they sell those cars, whether they be new or used. I think that's where it's going to go. And there's also an option, much like with a cell phone, when you upgrade the software. And I know Apple's been talking about this with their new Apple Auto or CarPlay. Upgrade the car. The battery dies, great. We have new battery technology. We have plants to build them. Let's upgrade the battery to a latest battery and then drive it for another 5 years or whatever that is, right? That, I think, is going to be very interesting as we move forward. But we are out of time. It's been a very good show. Special thanks to David. Maybe, David, you could tell us more about what you do because we skipped that today.
Okay, David Adams, I'm President and CEO of the Global Automakers of Canada. We're a national trade association representing the international automakers in the Canadian marketplace.
Thanks for that. There will be details below if you want to reach out to David for his opinions, which I'm sure are very insightful, being that he works in that space. I just play in it a little bit. And then we have Brandy, who's from Disclose, one of our sponsors. She's out of the oil-rich town of Edmonton, Alberta. Probably has some opinions there. But Brandy, maybe you can tell us more about what you do.
Yeah, I've been in the industry for over 27 years now. I have done everything from reception to GSM to corporate director. I spent the last 4 years building Disclose and MotoClose, which is a new, we call it a DMD, so it's like a DMS, only better, and an attached third-party selling site.
Thanks very much. Well, have yourself a great week.
Thank you.
And of course, if you have
Pleasure,
questions
Thank you.
about NADA, reach out. We will have videos edited as soon as I feel a little better, so probably by the end of the week. And we also have another video from our new one-on-one show that will be out soon. If I missed you at NADA, I'm sorry about that. It was just slammed and truncated. And if you're on the fixed op side of the business or want to be, fixed op show is starting live next month on Fridays. Details will be below and on the website. Our website's going to be new very soon. And if you're interested in one of these fancy new swanky shirts, hats to be announced when they arrive, just let me know and have yourself a great day. Bye now.